Hello, and dear every delegates and participants to the World Anti-Bullying Forum 2021. My name is Iselin Berg-Mulvik. I work at the Public Policy Management Institute in Lithuania, and I'm here today with Professor Carmel Cefai from the Center for Resilience and Socio-Emotional Health at the University of Malta. Together with researchers at PPMI, Carmel and we have been working on a study that was contracted by UNESCO, which was looking at perceptions of teachers towards bullying and school violence. So we will today present to you the results from our study. So the study looked at the perceptions of teachers, how teachers view violence, including bullying in schools, their perceptions of behaviors that are violent or not, and if behaviors, how common they are, and practices what teachers do and not do to prevent it, to also figure out what needs teachers have and how they can be better supported and ready to tackle bullying in schools. And so when we started the study, there had been multiple studies, but usually focusing on the perspective of students in measuring frequency of violence. And we were recognizing that teachers also have a huge role in limiting violence and bullying in schools. And we therefore need to better understand how they perceive and what needs they have to address it better. Our study consisted primarily of a global online survey that was targeting the whole world, but we also had an extensive literature review and focus group discussions in 4 selected countries. In this study, we will focus mostly on the findings from the global online survey, but the report will be available later this year where you can access all of the findings. We had 34,877 teachers from 147 countries participating. As you can see from this map, and as I will explain also, one limitation of this study is that we had a lot of respondents from Latin American and Caribbean, but otherwise we had also more female teachers participating, and then more equal distribution between different age groups. So yes, we must consider the finding of the survey with care and not overgeneralize, because this was a non-probability sample with snowballing design, and we therefore have kind of skewed representatives from different regions, like 81% from Central and South America and 90% of respondents from 10 specific countries. Also, the teachers responded, of course, based on their subjective perceptions, and this should also be considered. So first of all, what behaviors do teachers identify as being bullying? So we had different types of bullying in this survey. We had a focus on physical, psychological, and sexual bullying / harassment. I just want to clarify that with psychological bullying, we mean bullying that is targeting as mental abuse, but of course, all these forms of bullying do in some ways have a psychological effect on the victim. Otherwise, we see that most teachers view physical bullying behavior as violence, and about 3 in 4 teachers view the following behaviors as violence, such as threatening another student with a weapon, slapping another student in the face, hitting, shoving, kicking, or striking another student. And 1 in 5 teachers do not identify these behaviors as physical violence. We see that teachers are more likely to recognize more aggressive forms of sexual bullying, and that this is the one category of bullying that teachers perceive as more severe. So 3 in 4 teachers view the following behaviors as violence, such as touching another student in a sexual way or making fun of another student with sexual jokes or comments. And about 2 in 3 teachers see offering money or goods for sex as a form of sexual violence. And then 1 in 5 teachers do not agree that these behaviors are forms of sexual violence. Teachers are less likely to identify more subtle forms of psychological bullying. So name calling, sharing embarrassing information online, ridiculing or making fun of, and teasing in a hurtful way. These 4 in 5 teachers consider violence, and 1 in 5 consider them not violence. And then 3 in 4 teachers considered verbal threatening, spreading rumors, and intentionally ignoring or leaving out of group activities as violence. So these forms of verbal threats were considered more serious forms of psychological bullying than name calling and or ridiculing. And then we looked at how often teachers believe that bullying occurs in their schools. So psychological bullying was perceived to be the most common form of bullying happening in school. So more than half of teachers said that all forms of psychological bullying, ranging from 59 to 60% of the teachers in the survey, said that this psychological bullying occurs in their school, exception being sharing hurtful information through email, text, and messages. A significant proportion of teachers said that they don't know how often the various forms of bullying take place in their school. And this is also worth noticing. Verbal abuse and exclusion were believed to be the 2 most common forms of psychological bullying among students. Physical bullying was also perceived as being very common. 2 in 3 teachers said that hitting, shoving, kicking, or striking another student happened in their schools. 2 in 5 teachers said slapping another student in the face happens in their school. And then more rare, but still occurring, was threatening another student with a weapon, which 1 in 10 teachers said occurs in their school. And then most teachers believe that sexual bullying or violence does not happen in their school, or never happens. And this 4 in 5 believe that offering money or goods in exchange for sex between students never happened. And 3 in 4 believe that touching in a sexual way without permission never happened. However, looking at making fun of other students with jokes, comments, or gestures, this was much more frequently occurring according to teachers.
Thank you, Wislin. Now we will say something about what teachers do to prevent and respond to bullying and how confident they feel in doing this and the sort of training they had in bullying prevention. When we ask them about the strategies they use to prevent violence and create a safe classroom environment, most of them said, over half, that they teach comprehensively about values such as tolerance, inclusion, respect for diversity, children's rights, recognizing abusive relationships, and recognizing unsafe situations. However, fewer than half reported teaching students comprehensively about social norms, about gender, ethnicities, religion. And this is important to keep in mind, as bullying is not always interpersonal relationships, may reflect structural issues in society. Also, less than half, they teach comprehensively about keeping safe from online harassment. When we asked what steps do they take to identify students who are vulnerable to bullying, almost all teachers said that they rely on personal observations, encouraging students to talking with student relatives, and so on. However, only fewer than 1/3 of the teachers are unaware that the following groups of students are more vulnerable to existing violence, such as younger boys, younger girls, students with disability, gender non-conforming students, students from migrant families, and students from different religious beliefs. And we know that these students are particularly vulnerable to bullying, especially students with disabilities. For instance, up to 70% may be victims of bullying. Okay, so then we ask teachers what they do when presented with bullying situations in their classrooms. And at least 4 in 5 teachers say they help students who are victims in various ways. And the teachers support victims through classroom discussions, interacting with their parents, and teaching them how to avoid violence. However, only 1 in 3 teachers talk to the victims or mediates between the victim and the perpetrator, and even less refer victims to professional services, so less than 1/3. And that includes also school support services, or involves other students in supporting the victim. And this is quite important finding, because we know that victims, many times, they need emotional support, and that student peers are very good source of support to victims. Another interesting finding is that only 2 in 5 teachers overall, about half in Central and South America, says they take action to stop violence, including bullying, immediately. Okay, what do they do? Teachers do usually do with perpetrators. 3 in 5, they follow the school disciplinary procedures and classroom discussions about violence, where about half of the teachers, 1 in 2, interact with the parents. However, less than half, 4 in 9, teach or discuss with perpetrators how to regulate their emotions and behavior, and to ask them to apologize to the victim. Only 1 in 4 refer them to other sources of help, while very few punish them verbally or physically. An important finding here is that teachers do not spend so much time to help the perpetrator to change behavior. Okay, what do the students do with the bystanders? At least half of the teachers engage with the students, discussing with the whole class on the role of bystanders, having private conversations. So we're talking about 50%, discussing with the whole school about what they saw. This is very important finding that research is showing more and more the role of intervening with bystanders, because bystanders can reinforce bullying, a part that they themselves can become desensitized to bullying and suffer the consequences of bullying. Okay, the last area we ask teachers is, how equipped do you are to prevent bullying and respond to it? 4 in 5, so most, although not all teachers, think it is their responsibility to ensure that students feel safe in the classroom. However, 1/4 of the teachers do not think it is their responsibility, and this share is a little bit higher in the in the other countries besides South and Central America, about 25%. Okay. Most, but not all, teachers believe that they are able to prevent violence between students in their classroom. Over 4 in 5 teachers overall say that they are able to support students who are victims of violence, teach students how to protect themselves from violence, talk with parents, create a classroom environment, but only 1 in 2 feel able to develop good relationships with the students. Older teachers feel more confident about these skills than younger teachers. And this brings us to, I think we have seen this slide, to the issue of training. So most teachers do not receive adequate training to address school bullying. If we look at pre-service training on the left, only 1 in 3 teachers in Central and South America and 2 in 5 in the other regions reported sufficient training. Okay, so less than half overall. Almost 1 in 2 say they received little or no training. Quite interesting here, and also of concern, is that the younger teachers are most likely to report insufficient training. And here we are talking, therefore, about existing practice or practice which has not quite recent, In terms of in-service training, is the same, more or less, picture. Only 1 in 2 teachers say that their school provides adequate opportunities for in-service training and professional development. And most of teachers, 2 in 3, they say that they learned through experience. So this is a clear here, an area for intervention. Only half of the teachers, they have the full support of school management to address violence including bullying, while at the same time, about
minute.
3 in 5, okay, I will be concluding soon, say that violence in the classroom affects their teaching practice, motivation, and job satisfaction. So to conclude this overall presentations, overall, study shows that teachers need better training and support to address gaps in their ability to identify, prevent, and address school bullying. More specifically, most, but not all, teachers can identify various forms of bullying, and teachers from contexts where bullying is more prevalent are less likely to identify most forms of bullying. We found no significant differences between older and younger male and female teachers overall. Okay. Some teachers are not using a comprehensive range of strategies to prevent bullying and respond to it. Younger teachers are less likely to report teaching comprehensively about various topics on bullying prevention. And many teachers do not or are unable to stop bullying immediately. Almost half of the teachers feel that they are not fully trained and supported to prevent bullying and respond to it. And younger teachers are less likely to report to be well trained and to be confident. To conclude areas for further research, we need, of course, as Islan said, a more representative sample in terms of the geographical location. We need to include also the voice of the students themselves, besides of teachers. We need to focus on bullying against vulnerable, marginalized, and minority students. And finally, we need more research on effective practices and programs in preventing and addressing bullying, including what works in particular contexts. So I would like to thank you both for your attention.
Hello everybody, it's my honor to share my work. My name is Guogang. I'm from Beijing Normal University, working in Collaborative Innovation Center of Assessment for Basic Education Quality. I'm interested in the different perceptions of peer victimization in adolescence, and I'm going to talk about them and their associations with some problems. So this is my overview of my presentation. The assessment of peer victimization, subtypes of victims, a model to select related variable, methods of this research, the results on different types of victims, conclusions. Let's come to the first question, that is, how to assess peer victimization. Many researchers use self-report measures or peer nominations to identify victims, but the correlation between self-reports and peer reports is moderate, which means some victims' self-perceptions of victimization are not consistent with others' perceptions. So the same person may have different results measured by different methods. Both methods have advantages and limitations. For the self-report measurement, it may provide detailed information, such as when victimization takes place outside the school, it's difficult to be noticed by classmates, and the self-report could provide ecologically valid evidence of what happened. Moreover, self-reports capture the subjective experience of relational victimization, and that is impossible to acquire through peer reports. However, self-reports also have some limitations. First of all, people desire to protect their self-esteem and may discount victimization, and victims may have cognitive bias due to subjective experiences and recollections of peer relations. For the peer report method, also called peer nominations, the core advantage is that it minimizes the potential bias of each individual. for the reason that it collects data from many peers, and it may be suitable for identifying victims of the more visible forms of victimization. The limitation of this method is that it may be affected by social reputations and prejudice in class, and peers may be absent when the victimization takes place, so it may provide less information. In general, two methods may be different. Some researchers believe that two methods may be characterized by different patterns of adjustment, so it's a good idea to combine the two methods. By doing so, we could overcome their respective limitations and make full use of their advantages, and it can help us to identify different types of victims. Indeed, some studies find four types of victims, according to the combinations of different levels measured by the two methods. Convergent victims means high peer and self-reports of victimization. Self-identified victims represent high self-reports but low peer reports. Peer-identified victims are high peer reports but low self-reports. Non-victims are low and self and peer reports of victimization. But studies use different ways to identify four groups. Previous studies use specific cut-off points, which is relatively arbitrary. Some studies study to use the latent profile analysis, based on empirically identified response patterns. It can identify and classify individuals who are similar on specific characteristics into mutually exclusive latent profiles. It's more valid, but existing studies usually use only a single total score to represent the level of self-reports, and another single score to represent the level of peer reports. The total score, however, loses the detailed information of each atom. According to Diaz's stress model, both negative life events and one's cognitions about those events contribute to the development of internalizing and externalizing psychopathology. At negative life events, peer victimization could also influence one's development through the different perceptions of victimization, and the different perceptions of victimization could identify different types of victims. They may have different maladjustments, including internalizing and externalizing problems. However, there has not yet examined if the type of victims differ in externalizing problems. All in all, this study aims to find the different victimization groups and their association with internalizing and externalizing problems in adolescence. Internalizing problems include depression, loneliness, and social anxiety. Externalizing problems include deviant behavior. The sample of the study are 2,576 Chinese students. They are from junior high school, and we measured internalizing and externalizing problems. Most importantly, peer victimization was assessed by peer reports and self-reports. Two methods have four items respectively, and we standardized each score of items and recoded the standard scores to 1 or 0 to perform the latent class analysis. Then let's see the results. To select the optimal model, 5 models were estimated. According to the fit index, we chose the 4 distinct groups. This is the score probability of each items of the 4 groups model. The 4 items on the left are from peer reports, and the 4 items on the right are from self-reports. You will find the red line has a high score in peer and self-report of victimization, so animate convergent victims. The blue line with high peer reports but low self-reports, so animate peer-identified victims. The purple line with low peer reports but high self-reports, so animate self-identified victims. The green line with low self and peer reports of victimization, so animate non-victims. Next, we compare victim groups difference. The red still represents convergent victims, the blue represents peer-identified victims, the purple represents self-identified victims, and the green represents non-victims. Firstly, as in the depression, loneliness, and deviant behavior, we could find convergent victims have the highest score, and the non-victims have the lowest. Moreover, the score of self-identified victims is higher than peer-identified victims, and the bank testing found that most pairwise comparison results are significant, except for the difference of peer-identified victims and non-victims is not significant. However, the social anxiety shown a different pattern. Self-identified victims have the highest social anxiety, and the peer-identified have the lowest, and there is significant differences between each groups. Let's move on to the conclusions. We find 4 types of victims. The most problematic adjustment pattern is convergent victims. They have the highest level of depression, loneliness, and deviant behavior, who should be more pay attention to. The self-identified victims represent a unique group of adolescents. They report victimization while their peer environment does not perceive them to be victims. They have the highest level of social anxiety, and more depression, loneliness, and deviant behavior than peer-identified. One possible reason is that they might have cognitions or perceptual bias that make them sensitive to feel victimized and experiencing negative effects from peers. Another reason is that they may have emotional vulnerabilities, which make feel more social anxiety when interact with others. On the contrast, the peer-identified victims are the individuals who do not report being victims, while their peers report that they are. One possible explanation is that there may be some kind of threshold in the level of victimization that needs to be reached before the peer-identified victims would actually feel victims. Another reason is that they may reduce the effect of victimization by allaying the social anxiety. I hope the identification of different types of victims could help school administrators better specify policies to reduce the harm of peer victimization. We all need to come together to deal with these issues. Okay, this is all my presentation. If you have any questions, please contact me and let me know. Thank you.